You have an opportunity as a brand to define the kind of relationship that you want with your customer. The things that you do, the design decisions effectively that you make, the way that you communicate are going to be the things that shift the quality of the relationship from a good transaction to a bad transaction. And quality interactions like that are the things that have value to your business.
This is Velocitize Talks, and I'm Andy North. I'm joined today by Andy Dobson, Head of Technology for Publicis Polk. Andy, thank you for being here.
Pleasure, thank you.
Tell us a little bit about Publicis Polk and your role there and the unique value proposition that you bring to the market.
So Publicis Polk is a relatively new entity. It was formed by the joining of three agencies, Publicis London, Polk London and ARC. We've been part of the Publicis group actually for some time, but then we were basically kind of seeing the way that things were going in a more integrated fashion, and Polk a traditional digital agency, Publicis more of a comms agency, and ARC being a shopper marketing agency. We were working on each other's briefs, very closely aligned with most of our goals and strategy, and it made sense to combine and form a new entity, essentially.
And your role as Head of Technology?
Yeah, so my background, I've worked for about 20 years around the web and digital, first as a developer. I come from a development background, and then for the last 10 years or so, leading teams, running technology strategy, but always within the creative process. So the technology function within Publicis Polk is primarily actually a creative one, rather than a production one. So I'm right there in the heart of the creative process with a team kind of prototyping, building out different ideas, seeing what's possible within current or even future technologies, and helping our clients communicate better with them.
And in that role, how have you seen content and branding evolve, particularly in this market?
A huge evolution. I mean, the thing that always drew me to digital in the first place actually was its constant evolution. But within the comms space, you've almost had a bit of a tension between the digital, always moving, always evolving, and the traditional comms. This is the media plan, this is how we execute, and this is how we work out how to talk to our customer in that kind of sense.
In an era of 8-second attention spans, can you still bring exceptional storytelling into some of the strategies and campaigns that you've worked with?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. In fact, in my view, everything is storytelling. And that really is what the creative process is trying to do, is trying to tell a story. So even when you consider something like user journeys, that's a form of storytelling. If we were to kind of meet in an event and first start to talk to one another, we'd be giving each other pieces of information. We would be building up basically the narrative, often the narrative that we would want to tell, but we'd still be building up this kind of gradual narrative about each other's lives to piece that together. And the same is true even in, say, an e-commerce journey. You start off with, what is this place? Am I at the right place? Is this the thing I'm trying to buy? And then, what's the offer? How do I find the things that I want? And all of that is essentially a story that a brand is going to tell in the brand's fashion. So if you go to, for instance, the Walmarts of this world, they're telling their brand story in a certain way. And then if you go to something more boutique-y, then they're going to tell their story in a certain way. I regard absolutely everything as a form of narrative and a form of storytelling, even if we're breaking things down into a very pragmatic or practical set of steps to get people what they want.
That's excellent. As a veteran marketer, what are some of the trends and changes you've seen over the past few years, and perhaps where do you see those going?
So I think for years and years and years, digital particularly and technically driven marketing has been around increasing engagement. And whether that's based in kind of, likes and shares, or whether it's based in clicks, way back, there has been this kind of this desire to capture attention and capture presence of mind and all of those kind of things. And actually, I think where we're moving now, and actually where the industry has to move, is much more about defining the relationship that I want to build with my customer. So one of the things that I think we consider quite a lot is that our job happens at the interface between brand and customer. So where they meet, wherever they meet, and as referenced earlier, the places that they meet frequently are digital or based in some kind of technology. So at that point of interface between brand and customer, you have an opportunity as a brand to define the kind of relationship that you want with your customer. The things that you do, the design decisions effectively that you make, the way that you communicate are going to be the things that shift the quality of the relationship from a good transaction to a bad transaction. And quality interactions like that are the things that have value to your business.
And given that relationship and the inflection points that you mentioned, how do you continue to build that, particularly that brand marketing image and relationship in an era of Alexa and Siri when people are doing voice-based marketing or voice-based search? How do you build those? How do you have that brand image in this type of environment?
Yeah, well, of course, I mean, part of the problem with that is that that's not your platform. I don't think that that's a new challenge, because I think that the same has been true of search for a really, really long time. Traditionally, the industry has resorted to gaming the system effectively, SEO, being by and large a way of kind of understanding that system and perhaps not deliberately manipulating it, but certainly understanding its inner working in order to try and optimize your result for that. And that, I think, is also going to be a problem within voice. The biggest actual problem with voice right now is discoverability. So, we all have these devices in our home. My Alexa, even as a technologist, is essentially a glorified kitchen timer and, occasional radio, because not for the want of the value that I often gain out of it, but it's knowing where to start, knowing how to ask the right question. So I think what this comes down to is something which, I've certainly been really aware of throughout my career in digital, where marketers have often jumped on individual digital technologies as a wholesale way of solving a problem. Whereas in actual fact, what they are is they're part of that overall brand narrative. They're part of that journey. You still have to think about acquiring. You still have to think about onboarding. All of these things need to be built into the design of your products, essentially, and the design of your campaign even.
Given that journey, the industry swung hard towards content marketing a few years ago. Yeah. Do you still see content having a role? And would it be somewhere as just another part of that journey, another touch point from a content perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I do think content is still, perhaps not king necessarily, but still absolutely vital in all of it. I don't think any one thing is king. I think it's a holistic balance of all of these kind of elements. But one thing I do very strongly think is that people don't have affinity for a marketing campaign. But they don't. They do have an affinity for a really good story or a really engaging piece of creative work. So if it's the thing that catches their eye or the thing that provokes curiosity, and those are the things that, even if you're not doing above the line campaign stuff, even if you're just doing social posts or business as usual brand activity or something specifically orientated around, it could be something as simple as a sale offer or something like that. We must still try and find really interesting ways of just piquing the customer's curiosity, because I think that's what people do involved in. Do engage with. You see it with kind of viral content all the time, and I know the industry went through a bit of a patch where we were trying to contrive viral content. There are entire agencies that have been built around this idea of kind of contriving viral content. Some to a reasonable amount of success, but the things that I certainly see that get shared, and not just that get shared automatically, but that people really get moved by it or touched by it or have some kind of affinity, for that content.
I think you may have broken a few marketers' hearts there, that consumers don't fall in love with campaigns.
It's difficult as well, because when you're in that process and when you're in this industry, we love all of this stuff. We love those kind of stories that we tell ourselves a lot of the time. And I think sometimes it takes a bit of an objective viewpoint just to kind of remind ourselves with any piece of activity that we do that our audience isn't necessarily obliged to care about this. So what can we do? And again, I think this is where this relationship point becomes really, really strong. One of the best examples I've always thought is kind of data capture and form capture. If I again met you at a party and said, hi, so tell me about yourself, and you said, my name's Andy and I live in Austin, and this is my address and this is my phone number and this is my email address. I'd give it like, dude, but over the course of conversation, over the course of building a relationship, of course, we do find out all of these bits of information, about ourselves. And if there are more organic ways of designing a relationship over time, and I think some startups particularly kind of SaaS startups and tech-based startups have been very good at onboarding people with, we know you've come to us because you've seen something cool potentially that might be useful to you. So the very first thing that we're going to do is show you what we got.
Are there any other technologies coming into marketing, or ones perhaps on the horizon that excite you or that you're curious about? Perhaps AI or something, machine learning?
Yeah, so AI I've definitely got a bit of a bugbear about because it's such a generalized term. And in fact, I've always felt that AI really refers to a research goal rather than a specific piece of technology. Machine learning is very interesting. I have yet to see it be really applied in the creative process in a really, really engaging way. That said, I think there are a few opportunities for it, particularly around the processing of huge amounts of data. Is not, that's not of so much interest for me, but the interpretation, the manipulation of that, the way that we can actually maybe have different creative outcomes from what we would have thought of as a kind of normal creative process is potentially a really, really rich area. I just don't think it's there yet. AR and VR. AR I'm excited about. VR less so. I love VR on a personal perspective. There are a lot of experiences that I actually do quite regularly within VR, but it's an isolating experience. And I think for most marketeers, most brands that are trying to reach people, they don't want to isolate them.
That's excellent. We talked a little bit about content. Talk about your Power of One strategy. I'm curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, so Publicis group-wide have this idea of Power of One, and I mean, really it's a cross-group collaboration framework, which is not unusual within networked agencies. What I do think is quite unique about the way it practically works is not only are a lot of things internally within the organization set up to allow this much better, so we don't really act as siloed businesses in that kind of way.
So in your role, would you say that the technology drives the creative drives the technology, or just sort of a hybrid of both?
It's a symbiosis of both. When it's at its best, there is so the traditional advertising roles particularly would have been art director, copywriter, in terms of developing creative ideas. But it's really technology in the way that we do it is the ground in which that grows. So it's like the point I made about VR. You don't need to understand everything about VR, but if you understand it as, this is a replacement for reality or this is an isolating experience, then you know when to use it more effectively. And your creative ideas can grow out of the very qualities that make a particular technology unique. So that's really the way that we try and work. We work with our creative colleagues in order to give them a strong conceptual understanding of how any particular technology works, to break the brief down, to think about that relationship piece again and the relationship that they're trying to build with their customer, and then look at how different technologies can help not necessarily tell the whole story, but bring people from one context to another, or otherwise give them service in that way.
Is there a book, a blog, or a podcast that you're reading or you'd like to share with our viewers? Very
specifically, I've literally just finished Jaron Lanier's book on 10 reasons why you should leave social media. And Jaron is an ideologue, obviously, and I get the majority of where he's coming from. And the gap now between the digital world that we were kind of building back then and the world that we've created now is absolutely huge. And I think what Jaron Lanier's book allows you to do is to take a very objective look at that, and not to criticize any individual platforms or to, you'll make your personal decisions about where you sit with social media. But what is very clear is that the chasing after engagement that we have been doing for the last 20 years, the capture of attention, how can we use technology to hem you into a certain outcome that we want, is not working for us as a society. And I think what that then encourages us to do without judgment is to ask ourselves the question of, how would I design for a healthy mindset or for a good relationship with you?
That's fascinating. From one sci-fi nerd to another, Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Wars.
There we go.
Yeah, sorry.
My guest today has been Andy Dobson, Head of Technology at Publicis Polk. Andy, thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure, thank you for having me.